All right, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Comic Book Radio. Thank you guys for being here. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti, and this is episode 112. Tonight, my guest is Art T. Bear. You hear that? You hear that? I hear it. We're going to be talking about the evolution of creation. Becoming a problem solver. Art's had quite the career in comics. We're going to be talking about that tonight. Sark, what's up? Says Art. Look at that. Past Master Dan, thank you for being here tonight. Look at that YouTube link right there for Art T. Bear's channel. That link is also in the description of the show, along with a link to Black and White Volume 2, which is in demand on Indiegogo. That's Art's book. You guys can go check that out. Mighty Joe, what's up, Mighty Joe? Thank you for being here tonight. Dr. Mask in the house as well. What's up, Doc? Citizen Ronan here. What's up, Citizen Ronan? Hope you're doing well. What Geeks Do Network in the house. How's it going, What Geeks Do Network? Spaceman coming down from above for it looks like a little bit. So we will see you later. Catch you on the replay. Frederick is here. What's up, Frederick? Hope you're doing well. And thank you, Marcus Kellegrew, for being in the chat tonight. Along with Brian Suddenly Old. What's up, Brian? Hope you're doing good. Ronan's Review is here too. What's up, Ronan's Review? How's your night going? Andy Gogo is here. What's up, Andy Gogo? Along with Jimmy Reyes. Jimmy Reyes, look at that. Cigar Gangster is here too. What's up, Cigar Gangster? We also have Bobo Ayami. What's up, Bobo? Hope you're doing good. Appreciate that. We also have Rick Saylor in the house. How's it going, Rick Saylor? Along with Shrek PMC. What's up, Shrek? And Charlie. He says, yo, guys, hope everyone's doing good tonight. And I hope you're doing good tonight, too, Charlie. Thank you for being here. All right, so without further ado, let's bring him on. He's been patient enough. The man of the hour. And, oh, hey, Jetto Jaga, getting in at the last second there for a hello. Man of the hour, Mr. Art T. Bear.
How you doing, Pete? Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here, Art. Appreciate that.
Yeah, this was a little effort, but we made it happen.
Yes, yes, we really did. You know, and I was persistent. I wanted you to be on the show. I wanted to have this conversation with you. It's important. You're a top-notch creator, a great dude, and I'm glad you're here tonight.
Well, thanks, and thanks for being persistent. I've been a little missing in action, just trying to finish up Black and White Volume 2, Man vs. Machine, which I can honestly say now, the 64-page main story, pencils, inks, everything's done, colors.
Nice.
And I'm working on the epilogue right now, so the epilogue's 4 pages. So I'm 3 pages into it, so I have 1 more page to do. And then it's off to get it completely lettered and then off to the printing press. So things are looking good. So thanks to everybody for giving me the time to make what I think is the best work I've ever done in comics. Yeah.
Wow, man. Well, congrats. That's awesome. Getting a book done, it's a task. And I know that you put a lot into it. So congrats to you. And I'm sure if you guys haven't backed the book, again, the link is in the description of the show. So by all means, go check that out. It looks great. Okay, so Art, I wanna get back. Let's go all the way back.
Way back.
Way back. Way back. Take a time travel machine. Or a time machine, as some people might say.
Actually, if we're going way back, my first book was time travel. It was Time Masters for DC Comics. So, yeah. There you go.
Right, and you got chrono mechanics, you know. You're familiar with time travel.
Little time travel going on.
So let's do that. Let's go all the way back to the first time you ever saw a comic book and fell in love. When was that, and what was that?
Oh, my gosh. Okay, so let me think. Okay, 61 when I was born. The Batman series came out 66, I believe. So I was about 5, 6 years old, and I didn't know about comics or anything, but I was hooked on the TV show as a kid. So I still remember, and I still own it, my first Batman comic. And yeah, just saw it on the newsstand, didn't know what it was, asked my mom to pick it up. She said, if you're a good kid, you'll get this comic book. So the 10 cents, was well spent on my
That's
mom's
great.
part. So it never left me. So it was that Batman book, and I still own it to this day. So it's well loved. I mean, it's not in good shape at all, but I still have it. Yeah.
That's awesome. What particular issue?
Oh my gosh.
I don't need the number or
I
anything, but just
remember
even
it
who was
has
in it, what was in it.
Batman on the cover and he's parachuting down and I think somebody's shooting at him.
I know that cover. Okay, yeah,
Are you
wow.
serious? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's 60, I don't know, 66, 60 something, yeah.
that's awesome, man. Wow. Holy smokes. To be around at that point in time when everything was practically new in a way. I know Batman was around for decades at that point, but still.
Well,
It's
you know
it's
what the drag is? Okay, so like the Marvel universe is what? 60, when did that come out? Was it 60?
like 62.
62, okay. So, for about 10 years, like my local, like just shops, not like comic shops, but like liquor stores, supermarkets, things like that, they didn't carry the Marvel books.
Oh wow.
So all that early Marvel stuff, I didn't have access to.
Oh
So I,
man.
I didn't really get into Marvel until like late 60s, early 70s. So I would have all those books right now.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I got
cuz they
ripped off.
they were kind of like an indie company when they started off.
I think they were their distribution was like national, like national
Yeah,
periodical. Yeah.
they went through DC, which was national at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yep.
Marcus says Batman 178.
Wait, I'm gonna look that up.
That might be it.
178. Yeah, it might be it.
It sounds around the right numbering.
Batman. What was it? 178.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Ooh, it says value. I can not only see the cover, but I can see what the value is. That is it. Oh, holy shit. Okay. Let's see. Publication date January 31st, 1966. Cover price. Oh, it was 12 cents, not 10 cents. What is the value on this sucker? $26? Something like that. Ooh, and the page. Oh, the page count says 36, but they probably count in the ads and everything.
$26 might be that might be for a copy that's not in that great shape.
Yeah,
It's got to
maybe.
be more than that.
Oh man, I'm just looking at the cover right now. It's pretty killer. Oh, and Robin's there too, and he's got a hole
That's
in
right.
his
Yeah, a
parachute.
bullet
Yeah,
went through it. Yeah.
so he's plummeting to his death. Yeah, good times.
That's awesome. So you fell in love with comics at that point. You got the Batman 66 show. Now you're getting into the comics. At what point in time did you start drawing and wanting to make these things?
I think as a kid, like kids always draw, and I just kept drawing. And my dad was a little bit of an artist, so I think at some point he did try to do advertising work or work professionally. I think it was just real hard for him, the times, and he was saddled with two kids and then me, so three kids, and so I think the dreams go on the wayside. So I used to watch him draw, and my mom was she kind of painted, not like you'd think like these floral arrangements or anything like that, but she just painted things like statues and just stuff. And so there was always like artistic things going on around the house. So I just drew all the time. I liked comic books and I liked cartoons. So those were the subject matter that I mostly drew from, like Looney Tunes, Disney, DC, all that good stuff.
Did you always want to get into comics, or did you want to get into another aspect of illustration?
When I was a kid, I just did it. I never really had aspirations in any direction. I just kind of did it, and then you draw, and then you draw at school, and then kids around you are like, that's pretty good, and then I remember it was They have President's Day now, but they used to have, it was like Washington's birthday, and they used to have Abraham Lincoln. Remember, they were like 2 days, and then they just combined
Then
it
they
into President's Day
consolidated.
or whatever. And I did like drawings of George and Abe, and the teacher put them up on the wall, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've arrived!" Right?
I'm
Like
famous now.
yeah, that's killer, right? And then I think it was open house, so then you get to show off the drawings to your parents, and of course, my parents were just like, "Yeah, okay."
Your dad's like art critiquing it. He's like, hey, a little big on
Yeah,
the nose there. The
yeah,
proportions are a little
yes.
off. Probably should have, turned it upside down to see if everything looks
My dad
fine.
did teach me the mirror trick,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you draw and then you hold the image up to the mirror, and then you can see the flaws easier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Man, oh man. Did you have any aspirations of being something other than an artist or anything like that when you grew up? Was there any, like, you wanted to be a fireman or a spaceman or anything like that?
That's funny. Yeah, I don't think I had. I don't really remember having like any conscious thoughts of anything in any direction. I do remember when the Walt Disney, like that Wonderful World of Color or whatever that show was, and then Disney would kind of give you a glimpse of like behind the scenes stuff, and like when Walt was still alive. And I remember watching that as a kid and being really taken aback by it because it was all
Mm.
about creativity. It was all about this artist did this artist did that, and so it was really celebrated. And so I think that's when I first was like, okay, maybe. And so I still have my rejection letter from Disney, and I did send like some childish drawings with Crayolas to the Disney studios, and I still have that letter somewhere.
And
Yeah.
they actually wrote you back. Wow.
Yeah, they wrote me back. It was all typed, like hand typed. They didn't have computers. And then I think Mary Poppins was coming out around that time, so they gave me some promo stuff. So there was like this like book, and it was like promo Mary Poppins stuff. Probably like they would give to the press or whatever when they came to watch the movie. And so that was in the package. So I was like, wow, this is cool.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
That's a good idea to get stuff out there to people. I mean, obviously you have an interest.
Yeah.
Someone else will send you something.
Always promote,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
that's a good idea. So as you're moving along with your life then and you're getting the inkling to go and do something in comics, how'd you pursue that? How did that come about?
Okay, I have to say, so when I was a kid, I was hardcore comic books. And then I got to be a teen, and then your interests go into music, girls,
Yeah.
cars, things like that. So I didn't fully abandon comics, but it wasn't like my single, focus. So I still drew, but not really like anything, like comic book. Like I started getting into album cover artwork and things like that. So I would try to do, like the Hildebrands, the Mob Rules, the Black Sabbath cover. I remember doing some kind of watercolor, try to emulate that. And of course, the Kiss, albums were always pretty cool,
Mm.
you know. So I was taken by that, but then it was more music. So I started playing drums probably around 12, 13, and then just got in with a bunch of kids and just started trying to put bands together. And so all through like middle school and high school, it was all about music. So comic books wasn't really too much into my life. And then I got laid up in the hospital for a long period of time, and my girlfriend at the time got me a bunch of Pacific comics, and she got me some Savage Swords, the magazine size stuff, so more adult kind of comic books. And she knew I liked to draw because I was in the bed, I couldn't get up, I couldn't do anything physically.
Oh
So
wow.
so she gave me like a sketchbook and some pencils and just drawing stuff. And so I just laid in the bed and just picked up these comics, read them, Dave Stevens, Rocketeer, and, like John Buscema's Savage Sword, and, all that killer, more adult stuff. Like, I think there was even some, like, Bernie Wrightson, work in there, and just
Wow.
really cool stuff. And it was more illustrative. Like most of those books were more, they weren't like comic book art. They were like illustration. These guys are like masters. And so I guess it was just the right thing at the right time. So I started getting back into comic books, but it was more like adult type of, more mature comics and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I still didn't think I was gonna pursue this stuff. I was pursuing artwork in general, and I wanted to do album cover. I wanted to be an illustrator. So at that point, when I got out of the hospital, I enrolled in school, and so just like JC's, whatever I could get, because I was poor and I was on my own pretty young. And so whatever I could afford, I went to school at night. I had my full-time job, and I was pursuing illustration. And the cool thing is, one of the teachers, well, a couple, like the life drawing teacher and a couple of the different teachers would go, like, you're drawing, but you're drawing very heightened reality. Like, you're not drawing what you're seeing. You're drawing, like, these people in like the perfect light, right? So if it's life drawing, the girl was like, she looked hotter than she really was, and just stuff like that. Or the guy had more muscles and stuff like that. So one of the teachers said, "Do you like comic books?" And I said, yeah, I like comic books. He goes, I could see it in your work. So it was already influenced, like it was in the DNA, you know what I mean? Even though I wasn't really pursuing it. And so he goes, I know this guy, and he does comic books. And I go, oh, okay. And so that guy was Brian Murray. And Brian Murray, Dan Frigga talks about him a lot. He was working for Continuity Comics, the Neil Adams studio. And he was doing, I think it was called Megalith or something like that.
Oh,
like it was
okay.
that big muscular dude. And so I just started hanging out with Brian and seeing him draw and, drawing in his studio and just hanging out. His studio, it was his parents' house. We were all just kids. You know what I mean? So we're just in a living room table drawing, and we just called it the studio. And so, yeah, and then he would like let me ink some stuff, and he would kind of tutor me a little bit. And at that time, I was getting illustrative work. So I was working in LA. And so I was doing like novel covers, novel interiors.
Nice.
I worked for Bridge Publication, and that's the Battlefield Earth guys. They're the L. Ron Hubbard people, And so they treated me really, really well. I remember I was in the office when L. Ron Hubbard died. Everybody was just like in shambles. They were all like bummed out, And I was like, I don't know who this guy is. I'm working for him, but I don't know who he is really. But they were really, really cool. I got to meet Frank Frazetta, because Frank was doing like a lot of the cover work for Battlefield Earth. I think he did one of the covers.
Wow.
And stuff like that. So
I had no idea.
Yeah, some of the art directors and things just grabbed some of the young guys that they liked or talent, and we just got to kind of eat lunch with them and ask him questions, and it was just really a good time. So we had about an hour with him, and I remember asking him a question. Well, he was talking, and I said we were talking about pencils, like tight, inks tight. What do you suggest? If you're going to pencil and ink your own work, he said, pencil tight, ink loose. So his idea was like you get everything you want on the paper in the pencil form, and then just kind of loosen it up in the inks, so it doesn't look all stiff and mechanical. Because he was more like the process of doing that in the pencils, and then just kind of loosen up and then kind of do. Make the character and the figures move and things in the inks. And I always remember that. So, make those inks move, versus just kind of trace them.
Very true. Yeah, because a lot of people do it the other way. Very loose pencils, and then they get tighter ink, and it gets tighter and tighter and more, just you're losing the energy.
Yeah.
That's funny. It's really funny you mentioned Frazetta too. I just talked to Sarah Frazetta today. She's going to be on the show in January,
cool.
So that's funny.
Yeah, she's a great gal. Good interview.
Yeah. So getting into that aspect of it, what is it? Because you're mostly known in your mainstream career as an inker. Did you write anything in your mainstream career? Did you pencil anything as well? Anything like that, or was it mostly just sticking to inks?
I I met Jim Shooter at a convention. I lived in California at the time, and so he liked the portfolio, but he said it's still a little rough. He said we have a bullpen at Marvel, and I'm inviting you to come and be a Ramita Raider. And Johnny Ramita Sr. can kind of, and the people in the bullpen can kind of get you up to speed where you need to be, and then if that works out, then Marvel works. So I was young and stupid, so I worked. I saved a bunch of money, a couple $100, right? And I had a favor from a guy named Craig Anderson, who was Ralph Macchio's assistant at Marvel Comic Books. And his dad is the Marmaduke Anderson. I forget his first name.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, and so he said he regretted it. He goes, if you're ever in New York, look me up, and I'll put you up, and you can stay with me. And I go, okay. So I just show up. I didn't give him any forewarning. I just showed up at his doorstep, and I'm like, hey, I'm here to stay with you, Crash. And so he reluctantly let me in. And then the next morning, I went down to Marvel and showed him my portfolio, and I got turned down by everybody. Jim Shooter didn't remember, the conversation or anything like that, and so I was pretty dejected. And so I met a guy named Art Nichols, who I knew prior. He was a California guy too, and he was going over to DC Comics. He was working professionally now, and so he needed to drop some stuff off at DC. So he said, you want to share a cab ride over to DC? And I said, sure. And so I went over there, and it was completely different. Like, every editor I met at DC, they were like, this stuff's great. And these weren't just inks. I always penciled and inked my own stuff. Like, I was just one of those completists, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
understand the process. I just figured, like, this is how it's done. And so I showed my stuff, and I got work. So I got work that day, and I started working on the Who's Who. Like, DC had those Who's Who books.
Oh yeah, I love those.
Yeah, and so I started working on those, and everybody kept saying, you got to get them done quick, turn them in, and then you can get more work, and they need to trust you and all this other stuff. So I had the fear of God in me, so I worked my ass off. And that night I was working. Craig Anderson comes back from Marvel after a hard day's work, and he says, I got you a job. Like, Ralph and I talked, and we got you a job. And I said, on what? And he said, inks over Jose Delbo on the Inhumanoids. It was one of the Star books. I guess it was like
Yeah, I love Inhumanoids.
mid
Like
'80s.
big
I guess.
monsters, right?
Yeah. They had the
I
whole
love
toy
those.
line. Yeah, they had the toy line and everything.
Yeah,
The
I
guy
had
had
the
that rib. He had the rib cage, right? He'd put them in there, and then they decompose or whatever.
Yeah,
Rib
yeah.
cage.
I had the first issue. I recently sold my first issue.
I think I started on the second. Yeah, I'm
That's
not
awesome.
sure if it was issue 1 or issue 2.
I love the,
Yeah.
the toy line, the cartoon. I had a coloring book of the Inhumanoids. It was great.
It was a great toy line, and I remember very, very unexpected when I came back home to California. I had these big boxes, like, they were huge. There were like 3 of them or something like that, because those toys were big. They like
Yeah.
that guy, the one monster with the rib cage. It was about
Yeah.
like 2
Those were
feet,
crazy.
2.5 feet or whatever. And all the whole toy line was there in those boxes. I was like, comics are kind of cool, they give you free shit. And, and so basically the same day, I got ink work at Marvel and I got pencil work at DC. So I started working, doing pencils and inks, for both companies, rival companies, on the same day. So I never really distinguished too much between the two. It was a job. I was drawing. I was working on comics, so I was happy.
So at that point in time, um, there's a lot that seems like it must have happened anyway, because it seems like there's you're doing that, and then I mean, I've got books that I didn't even realize, and trading cards that I didn't even realize that you drew and that you inked.
Yeah.
So there's got to be something that happened. What happened at that point in time, especially with Marvel, where was it Jim Shooter leaving, and then all of a sudden now you were on the A list with the Inkers talent there, or how did that happen?
It was weird because I did just that one book. Maybe I did two books of the Inhumanoids, and then there was no more work at Marvel. But it didn't matter because DC absolutely loved what I was doing. So they kept me really busy with pencil work. So, like I said, I did those Who's Who books, entries, I guess they were. And I did a bunch of those. And then my first like pencil work and first like actual comic book work at DC was The Warlord, the Mike Grill book. And so I got a handful of those books, and I penciled them, and Pablo Marcos did the inks over me. So that was a lot of fun because I was a big Mike Grill fan, and I kind of liked the Warlord. I think it was he just I don't know. You look back and go, why did you like that? Because it's weird shit, right? But he had the helmet with the wings, and I was like, well, that's cool. And then there was just like women that didn't have very much clothes on, right? Like there was just a bunch of them. And so I think, and then there were dinosaurs. So I think it was just a combination of, a guy, and he had a gun and a sword. So he could cut you up and he could shoot you. And then he had like all these cool chicks around him. And, I think that's what I liked about it. And so it was a lot of fun to do that book because I was already a fan of it.
Yeah, Warlord was kind of like putting in everything that was really cool in the '80s.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
put it together. You
Yeah,
got
yeah,
guns, you
Lloyd.
got barbarians, you got sexy barbarian women, you got dinosaurs.
Yeah, and I was into like metal, like Iron
Yeah,
Maiden and stuff like that, and Sabbath, and so he had that one skull thing over his shoulder, with the big like saber tooth teeth or whatever on it, and then he had the chain across, and I was like, this is kind of metal, this is kind of cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
That's interesting. I could see that. I could see how you're into that. Uh, so you're enjoying your time at DC. What happens where then all of a sudden you find yourself at Marvel, or were you working both at the same time?
At that time, I wasn't working both. So I did some pencils and inks on the Teen Titans Spotlight. So I did a few of those. I got offered, and I did. It was a maxi series, I think they called them in the day, and it was Time Masters, Rip Hunter Time Masters. So that was 8 issues, and they used a lot of that material for that Legends of Tomorrow, that TV show.
Mm.
So they used Time Masters and things like that. So I got a pretty good residual check for that. So that was nice. And then I was having a hard time just like keeping schedule with the pencils and things like that. And so there was a friend of mine named Jonathan Peterson, and he was working as he worked as his own. He was an editor on his own books, but he also worked as an assistant to Mike Carlin on the Superman line of books. And so I don't know how it happened, but they just thought I would be a good fit doing finishes since I penciled and I drew and I inked. So I think Dan Jurgens was falling behind, or they just couldn't get something to click with inkers, and so they tried me out on the book, and it just worked. And so then, like, Superman was the big, my big break, and I did that for a couple years. But as I was working on that, Marvel took notice of the style, and also there was a year where I was kind of like I was nominated for all these awards and stuff like that, and I didn't even know about any of this stuff. Mike Carlin says, "Did you know you were nominated for this?" And I think they had like it was called like the Kirby Awards. They had different awards then too than they have now. Like they have the Eisner and but there was a couple of them then. And so then Bob Harris gave me a call, and so I did. I think it was the X-Men Annual with Art Adams. So I just went right over,
Wow.
and started doing that, and then I started working with Walter Simonson on Fantastic Four. And so at that time, I was working both. So I'm doing finishes on Dan Jurgens on Adventures of Superman, and I'm helping out Walter on Fantastic Four, and then inking just like X-Men. Just if this guy couldn't do this page or that page, just kind of fill in stuff, and then the call came. It's like, Jim Lee wants you to work with him on Uncanny, and so that's when that kind of full-time X-Men position, opened up. And so then it just kind of steamrolled after, just kind of built after that into a pretty huge juggernaut of, because the X-Men wasn't selling that well until we as in, Scott Williams, Jim Lee, Will Spertaccio, and myself really started, working on those books on a regular basis. And then like it just, wow, I couldn't believe what was happening. It was pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was like the perfect storm of creators on all those books, and then all the other books that Marvel had at the time too. Goodness. Uh, Whew. So you're doing a lot of awesome work at Marvel, and you did a lot of great work at DC too. I had no idea how many Art T. Bear books I had, to be perfectly honest. I went through my collection one day. You and John Byrne. I was like, I got a lot of Art T. Bear stuff. I got a hell of a lot of John Byrne stuff. I had no idea. Because when I was collecting, I was just collecting the stuff that interested me, and I wasn't paying too much attention as to who was making it. As weird as that might sound.
No,
And
no, I
then
was the same. I was the same way. But go ahead, make your point.
Yeah, and then I was gonna say, and then one day I decided to pay attention to who I was, because I was like, I'm noticing a similarity here upon styles and upon stories and things I'm drawn to, and then I'm finding a lot of the same names popping up over and over again. I wasn't aware I have like several dozen books that
Yeah,
you're
I was
involved
like
in.
that. Like I look back, like this was decades ago, but you look back, at your old collection, you're like, I must have really liked George Perez, because there's a lot of George Perez books
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
I really like John Byrne, you look at all the, there's a lot of Gil Kane, right? And so then as a kid, you just kind of bought what you liked, but you didn't really pay attention to that stuff, like you said. So I know I had the same revelation,
yeah. It's interesting how that comes about. Um, so let's fast forward a bit to when you had left Marvel. Now you're going independent. You're with Image, and you're working with them. How did that come about?
It was very, very organic. So at that time, like that West Coast thing was really, they call it the West Coast look. And so Jim, Will, Scott, myself, like we were a tight unit. I mean, we were just, there's a lot of uncredited stuff that, like, well, mostly that I and Hack Shack Studios did when there was a time problem. So we were just kind of, we weren't going to give up any pages. It was a tight unit. We're going to keep this controlled. So it really became kind of almost like just a tight knit. We almost just answered to each other more than Marvel. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like we just did our thing, and it was almost like we could dictate, but not in a bad way, or not like we took advantage of it, but like dictate terms to Marvel. And so we just kind of did things. We did our own, kind of our own direction. And then I
More of an
remember,
auteur kind of a thing going on with creators.
yeah, yeah, it was a little more like, it was less editorial, and more kind of just independent, like creator. So we could actually make suggestions be heard. Things could happen, and Bob was very good at that. I thought like Bob, I know Bob gets a lot of flack sometimes, but Bob Harris, the best thing he did was just kind of get out of the way, and he manifested. So if you said something, he would kind of try to make it happen, no matter what. So that was always great. But what else was happening is we were doing, like, there were T-shirts, and there were other like outside forces that were coming in. And so there, I do remember there was a convention promoter, and so he wanted to hire the four of us to just do like conventions, like travel around, kind of like an exclusive thing, and then we would all be kind of like I guess the guests,
like going on tour.
yeah, we were. It was like an X tour. Yeah, exactly. And so at this time, some of the image talk was happening. Like going on our own. There was a little disgruntled, like we're making this much money, but Marvel's making this much money. Because these books are now selling, probably average 8, 9, to 1 million copies a month. So that's quite a bit of money, and so we're doing this tour, but like Wills didn't do a lot of the shows, and Scott didn't, and I think Jim and I, because I think we were a lot faster, getting things done, so we had more spare time, and we worked good on the road too. Like we could get things done in the hotel room, stuff like that, and so we're doing these shows, and as we're traveling around, there's other ex artists and stuff like that coming into these cons. So it's not just us. They're inviting other people. So it's like Larry Stroman, who I think was doing X Factor at the time, then Mark Silvestri, and some of these guys are kind of coming to the show. And so I do remember just kind of going out to dinner and things, and just having these conversations. And then the next thing I know, there is this kind of movement, and I knew Rob because we lived close in Southern California, but I wasn't that close with him when the Image thing was happening, because I moved to L.A., so I wasn't Orange County anymore. So I was closer to like Silvestri at that point. So we both lived in like the South Bay, which is like the L.A. beach area, and so I remember just having conversations. I think Mark and his girlfriend at the time came over to the condo that Pamela and I had in Redondo, and we had dinner, and we were just kind of talking. And he's like, "There's this book, Cyberforce, and I'd like you to ink it." And so I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then what was it? Brandon Choi worked with Jim Lee, I think, and they created like what was it? Wildcats and some of that stuff. And they came by the place and was talking about like Wildcats and things like that. And they said that Wills had a book that was called Wetworks, and they wanted me to work on that book. So I think we were still working at Marvel when a lot of this stuff was happening. Yeah. And so those guys all just pretty much unannounced just left.
And can you remember at the time, was there a plan to try to pitch these to Marvel, or was it always a plan to keep these close to the vest and then eventually leave and go independent?
I wasn't that in the inner circle. Like I was close to the inner circle, but I wasn't there when a lot of those guys were powwowing together, right? So my stuff's still independent with all the different guys, but not kind of as like any kind of unity or like we're going to publish. Yeah, I mean, there was talk obviously about publishing under like a banner, so all the books are together. But I was still more or less just talking to the individual talent. And we weren't really talking about the big picture stuff. And so then Jim left. And so Jim, on his way out, talked to Harris, and he said, Art's a good penciler. You should have him. He'll be like the in-between guy between me and Kubert coming on the book, and like a buffer, and then also you can get ahead on schedule. So he asked me, and I was like, sure. So that's when I did 12 and 13, I think, of X-Men, where I penciled and inked those books. And so I think I was so busy with that, that's when all that Image stuff was really, they quit, and then that it started becoming reality at that point. But I think I had my head down so much, because it's so much work, right, trying to get those 2 books done. And then I think Harris was just scared that he was going to lose everybody, so they flew me out to New York, and he had a big conversation, and he said, I'd like you to do Cable. pencil and ink cable, and Fabian's going to write it. And so at the time, I was just kind of like, well, there's nothing really happening yet. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have that Cyber Force book. I don't have that, that Wetworks book yet. So I'm just a work guy, like I would freak out if I didn't have something to do.
Yeah.
So I took the series, and about that time, Pamela, who's now my wife, we moved into Orange County. So now I'm more like hanging out with Rob now, like less of the LA guys. And so there was like, it was all Southern California, but it was like LA was the extreme, like northwest, and then there was
It's like it got divided up into territories.
Yeah, and then there's San Diego, which is like the homage guys, right? And then there's like the middle, which is Orange County, and that's the Jim, Valentino and Rob Liefeld kind of thing. And so I had Hack Shack Studios, so I had Danny Mickey working with me, and I had Trevor Scott, and so the three of us, like whenever Homage would get in trouble, we would jam. You know what I mean? When back to what I said, where we would do a lot of stuff that we weren't even credited for, to help out and just make the schedule. And so those guys were getting wooed by Jim and by Rob. And so I remember Jim had me down to San Diego, and they had just, I guess, bought or were buying the studio, which became Wildstorm. And he's like, hey, Art, here's your future office. This huge office, right? Windows, could see the beach, everything. It was amazing. Had a great time. Gareb Shamus was there, and it was just like a great party. But just my wife and I just bought that house, so it would have been like a 2-hour commute to work there. So I turned that down, and then Trevor Scott was saying, like, Jim wants me to work with him, and I said take it. If it's a better offer than what I have here at Hack Shack, take it. And so he did. So he moved down to San Diego, and so he was, I think, him and that, what was his name? Scott Clark was the guy that what was his name? I think it was Scott Clark. He passed away. I'm trying to think of the book that he did, but that was, I think, Homage's first hire, or Wildstorm's first hire, was Trevor and Scott Clark.
Chat, help us out if you can, unless maybe Art's remembering it correctly, and that's the dude.
I think it is Scott Clark, but I can't remember the book. But anyway, that didn't really work out, right, and so then oh, cool. And then Danny Mickey was very cool, and he goes, Rob's offering me, the studio gig at Extreme. And so I said, same thing. I said, you should take it. And so now, I still have the studio. I still have, people I'm working with and things like that. But like that kind of phase felt like organically it was going away, just like working with a studio, inking a bunch of books, things like that. So then I started just hanging out with Rob, because they were close and Danny was working there. So I'd just visit and hang out. And so then Rob just made an offer, here's an office for you, blah, 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 treat you good, pay you better than Marvel, all that stuff. So then, I was like, it's like 20 minutes away from my house. You know what I mean? I can be part of like this cool studio. And so that's what I did. So that's how that Extreme Studios, Image Comics thing happened.
Wow, man. I had no idea of the extensive history behind a lot of it. This is, I'm very fascinated, man.
And I wasn't even privy to like a lot of it. You know what I mean? Like this is just kind of like in my peripheral. So I'm
because I know so much of like the more known superficial sort of story of how a lot of this got formed, but there's always stuff that there's layers to it that you're not aware of. people that are on the ground floor, people that were doing the things that you were doing, that were sort of like you were in it, but like you weren't coordinating it necessarily. And it's always
Right.
interesting to get that viewpoint too, because that tells a different side to a lot of the other things, and it actually even makes it more real. Because the other stuff is so big, it's so kind of almost larger than life. It's easy to just picture them. They go in there, they like slap it down at both publishers, and they're like, "We're not working for you anymore," and then they just like storm away, and it feels like, oh, okay, But obviously, the real story is a lot more. It's a lot more not mundane, but there's so much more to it. There's so many details, so much more minutia, so many little things. People that maybe in hindsight, it looks like, oh, they must have been incredibly confident about it. Every single thing must have felt like, yeah, 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 this is great. We're doing this. But that there's everybody going like, I don't know, is this going to work? Are we going to pull this off?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fear, and excuse me. The thing is that there was the seven that got the limelight, and rightly so, but there was this whole like structure that went with them. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like there were inkers, there were colorists, there were letterers. You know what I mean? There were like Marvel was losing a lot more than just those guys. They were losing their infrastructure, on those books, and so letterers, the whole nine yards, and so I was a little higher up on the food chain as far as that, but I was definitely one of the more supporting, like the more supporting roles for those guys, at least in the early days.
Yeah, and honestly, it shows. I think it shows incredibly because I feel like by the time 95, 96 rolls around for the mainstream in particular, the books really took a nosedive in quality. And it's because, like you just mentioned, it's not just those guys, the main guys that had left and formed, but it's everybody else that they were kind of taking and having work done, and everybody was doing something, and it was like a scramble to figure out, okay, let's have a bunch of the rookies or people who maybe aren't ready enough just yet come in and do whatever, along with creating. I mean, let's face it, when Image formed, that's the reason for Death of Superman. That's the reason for a lot of the different things done at those companies where it seemed like, wow, that's an extreme move. They're trying to really get attention and market share back again. And they did a lot of moves that, it worked, but at the same time, at what expense?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of interest in comic books from different places, and so what is that? The tide raises all ships, or whatever that
Yeah,
is.
the
So
rising tide lifts all boats, that kind of
right, so
thing.
like yeah, so like Marvel was doing well, and then Image, and then like a lot of the books, even if they weren't like great, they still did really really well. So there was a lot of success at the time. Some rightly so, some maybe not so much. But just to put a final pin in, my story with Image was that it was a good thing that I stayed at Marvel a little longer, even though I was working on cable when I was at Extreme Studios. Like I'm in those offices when I'm penciling cable, and so the thing is that there was only one Cyberforce that came out that whole year, that first year of Image Comics, and there was no Wetworks, because Wills had a death in the family, and so it was good that I did what I did, because if I would have waited, it just I don't think it would have worked out as well for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
As
if you
far
went all in with it.
yeah, I
Yeah.
would have been sitting on my hands, and I don't know what I would have been doing, like scrambling for work. I don't know what would have happened at that time. So it all worked out good, I think, for Image Comics and for me, I think, in the long run.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now let's go all the way into you being a full-fledged independent creator. Self-publisher, creator, writer, artist. You're doing everything. You're running your own thing. How did that come about?
At Image, the early
No,
stuff.
just even for you, just on your own. Like let's even leave the comic industry, I guess, as we know it in a way. Leave the publishers, leave all that behind. How did it come about with you deciding, I'm going to tell my own stories. I'm going to get my own stuff out there because that's another big transition. That's another step in your career that, let's face it, many people are not taking that step that probably should, but for some reason aren't. Maybe they feel they can't do it. Maybe they're scared, whatever it may be. But you're going into it, and obviously you're talented. Obviously you've been doing this long enough that you've got the expertise and the know-how to do it creatively. But there's a whole different thing than being able to take someone else's toys and play with them than there is to say, I'm going to invent my toys and play with them. That's a
Right.
whole other level. How did that come about?
Well, I think like from the very beginning, when I started working with Jim Valentino, he was it was Aardvark Vanheim, so the Dave Sims company, and his wife was Denny Lobert, I believe, and so they were splitting up, and so Aardvark went one way, and I think they were the ones that were publishing Jim's book. I think Normal Man, and so I was kind of ghosting on some of that stuff at the time, and so then I just started hanging out with Denny Lobert because of Jim. Like we would just hang out socially. And so I had some ideas, like sword and sorcery ideas. Like I was big time into sword and sorcery. So this is a time when, Conan, Arnold, and, all that stuff was happening. And so I would picture ideas. And so those things never happened, but I do remember I did execute like pitches and like, God, maybe it was like 8 sample pages that I put together, wrote, penciled, and inked. And so I had a tentative publishing deal, but I don't remember, it was 40 some odd years ago. So I don't remember the details of how it fell apart. But I do remember I like that indie spirit. Like these guys were like underground. Like this was like, as Tales of Bean World, like the
Yeah,
Freak
yeah.
Brothers. Like this was
Wow, man.
So I was hanging out with these guys. So that indie spirit was really just kind of like getting in my DNA. And I always liked, Jim Valentino because, he'd have an idea, then he would just execute it, Like he didn't go through like any channels or any of that stuff. He just kind of, well, this is my next Normal Man comic, or here's a short story I'm going to do, that type of thing. And so, I did start working in the independents. And the reason the mainstream thing happened is because I needed a steady paycheck. Because those indie things is very sporadic, and sometimes you don't even get paid. So, but it never left me. So all those years I was working at Marvel and DC, that kind of spirit was always there to tell stories, create characters, things like that. So I remember this is pretty early on when I was working with Walter Simonson. And Walter on Fantastic Four, he was kind of like, I'm kind of hitting rock bottom, and there's this character Sharon. It was the she thing. I forget the
Okay.
character's name, Sharon something.
It wasn't
And
Sharon Ventura, was it? Because
maybe,
I know that was one of the Miss Marvels.
yeah,
But
because at the
it
time
might have been, actually, because
there
she
was.
debuted in Thing.
I think you're right. Yeah. And so there was that whole like Ben Grimm stopped being the Thing, but he had a crush on the Sharon, and it was vice versa. So there was kind of like this infatuation between these two people, and so then she was the Thing now, and he's this human. And so he said, like she's not really doing that good. People are really, you know,
Okay. Yeah, it was.
yeah, Sharon,
Okay.
that was a good call there, Pete. Your comic book lore, and
I
so
got the whole series of The Thing and a bunch of the Walt Simonson Fantastic Four, so
yeah,
I was
and
like, I think it's that.
I
I'm
think
hoping
that's
I'm
who she
remembering.
is. Yeah, and I just remember him telling me this, and I was like, well, do a role reversal, and he was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, people want Ben Grimm to be the Thing again, and they're not really care about crazy about this she thing or whatever her name was. I said, and they're infatuated with each other, but there's no they can't really get together. Like there's this rock person,
Yeah.
and there's this human person, right? And I said, well, what if Ben was thinking like if he was the thing again, then he would be compatible with her, and then they could be together, right? And then she has the same thought, like what if I was human, then I could be with Ben Grimm. So they're
It's like
both
Gift
willing.
of the Magi.
Exactly. And so the whole thing was like, but they're giving it up for love, right? They're giving up these things, because like Ben Grimm doesn't want to be the thing. You know what I mean? Like he's happy but he can't be with the girl he loves, and she is like not happy being the thing. She wants to be human, so it kind of just worked out. And I said that, and oh my gosh, he made me feel 10 feet tall. Like he was just like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is perfect. And he got all, like excited. And so then we're just riffing off this idea, right? And so then, just like most of the stuff in my life, I just go in another direction and just forget all about it. And so then it was the Fantastic Four annual. I can't remember what number it was, but Walter gave me writing credit for story idea. And he said, credit without pay to Art THIBERT for coming up with the idea, or something like that, right? And so then I wasn't even pissed that I didn't get paid for it. I was just like, I was so flattered that like Walter actually acknowledged me in the credits. So I was like, oh hell yeah, this is great. So then all of a sudden, you're kind of like your ego or like whatever you're thinking, like, maybe I got some good. Maybe there's some ideas, right? And so then I was hanging out with John Moore. I was roommates with him, and he was Howard Chaykin's writing partner. And so he ended up writing Flag, I think, after Chaykin left. And so he's a professional writer, like, and they're writing that TV show, The Flash, the original one. Him and Walter. And so we would just riff off ideas. He'd ask me about things, and I would, talk to him. And it felt like kind of like you're an equal. Like, I think we've all had that kind of moment where you're not sure about, like, can I do this? Am I any good at this? But then all of a sudden there's people that are really good at it, and they're asking your points of view. They're asking, like, well, what about this? What about that? And so we just started talking. I remember when he was working on The Flash, the TV show, and I said to him, he said, what's wrong with the show? Because they weren't getting good ratings and things. And I said, I know Walter wants this to be a procedural cop drama. I said, but that's not The Flash is. I said, just people want to see gags. They just want to see speed gags. That's all they want to see. And he's like, what are you talking about? I go, I watch the Lou Ferrigno Hulk. Like, all you did is, it's almost like watching porn, right? You're watching the stupid setup with the pizza guy, right? But all you wanted to see is that pizza guy with that hot chick, right? So it was kind of...
I'm never going to watch The Incredible Hulk the same way again.
Well, good, because I hate Lou Ferrigno. if we can, mess with his residuals.
To find out that story, go to Art THIBERT's YouTube channel after the show.
Yeah, after the show, and so anyway, I'm getting through in my own way to John, and then he said, "Well, what would you do?" And I said, "I'd do the Batman '66 thing, man. I'd get all these like guest appearances, like all these like not necessarily A-list talent, but like known talent, like and I would cast them as these villains,
constant guest star stuff. I mean, that's obvious, like great stuff to do that,
Right. It was obvious to me, but it wasn't to those guys.
Yeah.
And so then you see Mark Hamill show up as the trickster, I think. And then Rick Springfield as Mirror Master, and you saw, but I think it was just too far gone by that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like I said, it kind of strokes your ego. You start thinking like, well, maybe I can do this. And so I wrote a Green Hornet treatment, and I sent it to DC, and it was greenlit. It was going to happen. And so then they started. I was going to write and draw it, and so then. DC, there was some kind of rights issue. There were two people that had that were contesting rights to the Green Hornet, and so DC thought it would be better just not even to get involved because of the legal issues. And so then I
Is this
came
when
up.
Now Comics had it
No,
at
this
that
was
point?
DC. I pitched. No,
No, for Green Hornet.
this was before Now did it.
Oh,
So this
okay.
was before it was published. Now did it later. So this was before that, and I pitched this to DC. So then I guess Now was able to either they didn't care about taking the chance or whatever, and DC is a bigger entity, so their lawyers probably advised them not to get involved. But then while I was working on Adventures of Superman, Dan Jurgens came up with an idea with the Fantastic Four. Like there were like these stand-ins for the Fantastic Four, but then it all went horrible, right? Like all of them died except for the Reed, character, the Mr. Fantastic character. And so then he eventually became that cyborg Superman. But before that, I said, and I pitched this to. It wasn't like these big pitches. You just talk to people, right, Pete? Like in those days, like it wasn't ceremonial, or you had to schedule time or book time with somebody. You just
You
kind of
never remember the
talk.
gavel and like, hold everybody, hold on, I
Yeah, I
need
got
to.
this idea. Yeah, you just kind of like talking. And so I said to Mike Carlin, who was the editor of the book, I said that should be DC's Doctor Doom. Like that guy, because he's got a chip on his shoulder. He was responsible for getting his family killed and all this stuff. I mean, this is like the tale of a villain. Like this is a villain's origin. And so he said that's really good. He said write it up. So I wrote up a treatment. And that's when my wife and I started working together. So she helped me put it together. We pitched it, and Mike greenlit it. But I think there was a third party involved, and the third party didn't want to compromise some of the ideas, so it never happened. So he started a fight with Mike, and so that never happened. But I have one more situation like this, and it was my wife and I, and we had DC came to me, and they wanted me to do a Nightwing miniseries because the Titans were starting to heat up. And so they wanted to build on the franchise, not just the Teen Titans book, but like peripheral books. And so I came up with the treatment. Pamela helped me out with it, and we pitched it, and it was greenlit. And so that was on the it was happening. So Wizard did an article on it, and there was some promo art that was done. There was a retail poster. There was some posters inside of like the Titans books, and it was going to be big. But that's when the Image thing started happening, and then Marvel offered me Cable, and DC was kind of the editor that had greenlit, and I had all this stuff lined up with. He was fired, and they brought some new guy in from Warner Brothers. He didn't even know comic books, and I just didn't get along with him. So I figured this was going to be too much hassle. I'll just go over and do this Cable book with Fabian.
What
And
year was that?
oh my gosh,
You can remember roughly speaking?
early '90s. It had to be, yeah. So man, I did a lot of stuff. I was working with Jim Lee on the X books at that time, because I remember there was a Teen Titans Summit. They had all the creative people together, and it was at the Universal Sheridan. We went to Universal Studios and everything on DC's dime. And I remember inking Jim Lee pages at that summit.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, all those things kind of gave me confidence, and so then when
Yeah,
Rob Liefeld,
little seeds being planted along the way where you're like, yeah, maybe this is
maybe I
fun.
could do this.
Did
Yeah.
you get energized every time with that idea phase and you're getting into it and making those ideas come to fruition? Nothing like that, right?
It's so fantastic. Just having, because also the idea phase, I guess they call it blue sky phase.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's like anything goes, right? Like you don't have to get to the nuts and bolts of it. You just kind of like anything could happen. So you're just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And then the hard part is when you have to start editing it down to
And
something
then,
real
figure out the
intangible.
details later, make it
Yeah,
cohesive. Yeah.
I don't like that part, but I like the early part. But anyway, so Rob offered me. He said you could do a book for Extreme for Image Comics, and so that's when Black and White was born. And that was like 94, 93, late 93, 94.
There you go. Wow.
So
So
it took a while, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, like anything else, because you arrive to where you're supposed to arrive to when you're supposed to arrive there.
I
You know,
believe that too. Yeah.
and there's a lot of people who want to force that outcome, and it never really works out ever, if at all. You know, sometimes you got to go through 10 years of whatever it is, successes and failures, various things that teach you how to do it the right way to get to where you're going to be later on. And some people sit there sometime and go, you know, oh, if it was just 10 years earlier, it would have been this. But it never would have happened 10 years earlier. So
Exactly.
don't think about it that way. But it's interesting how you're detailing the whole entire journey. Now, once you kind of got out of, or I'll let you actually finish it. What happened in terms of publishing wise that led you to not want to necessarily work with a publisher or anything like that, but you still wanted to continue making comics and become your own publisher?
You mean like where I'm at right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's like you said. It's opportunity, but also being smart enough when you see the opportunity to jump in. And so in 94, 95, 96, like the Image Comics, and actually the industry kind of started taking a nosedive. And so the money wasn't really there as much. And there was a lot of infighting at Image. And every day going into Extreme Studios, it was like, you know, everybody, because all the younger guys are like, what's going on, Art? What's going on? And I'm like, well, this is happening because I've been through similar situations. And I said, I don't think the money's there anymore. And I said, I think those glory days are gone. So I think hopefully you saved your money. You know, you did good when those salary days were there. A lot of guys, unfortunately, did not. You know, they didn't see. I always knew that it wasn't going to last. I always knew Image was not going to last. Usually, comic phases go in 10-year cycles. So, you know, like the X-Men stuff was 10 years. Image Comics was around 10 years. You know, they usually go in cycles like that. And so it was about time for it to happen. And so Pamela and I, my wife and I, we just had a child. And so I was a little nervous because I was doing black and white. So I was all in on black and white. So I took 8 months or whatever to compile 3 issues. I wanted to get 3 issues done before issue 1 came out. And so we were going to do we did the mini series, and then we were going to relaunch with an ongoing. And so I got 3 issues into black and white. And so by the time I got issue 1 of the ongoing out, the market had shifted so much. So the numbers because I was real close with Nick Barucci at the time, good friends, and so we would talk numbers all the time. But these numbers were slipping so quick, like month to month. It was almost impossible to predict, at least when it first started, because you couldn't tell where it was eventually going to go because you couldn't conceive of it. You know what I mean? Like how quickly, and I don't know if you were selling comics or doing comics at the time, that you could see it, you know.
Which year?
This is probably 95, 96.
I mean, well, yeah, I was reading comics at that point in time, that's for sure.
Okay, so
yeah, Alterna didn't get started
reading.
till 2006. So I was like 12 in 96.
Oh my gosh, you're
But
such
yeah.
a youngster.
Yeah, I'm 39 now.
Oh my gosh, to be 39.
But I noticed as a kid in 95, 96 that there seemed to be some weirdness in the comic industry. So much so that I was like, well, I guess I can't do that for a living anymore. Because ever since I was a kid,
you were that aware?
I was like, I'm making comics when I'm an adult. This is what I want to do with my life. And I at that point, because I thought there was so much weirdness, I'm hearing about Marvel bankruptcy, all this other stuff. I'm like, I gotta pursue something else. So I still want to do something in the arts, and I went more towards like a graphic design, learning how to illustrate. Maybe I'll do trading cards. Maybe I'll still work for some kind of magazine. I kind of wanted to work for Wizard at one point, and I was like, maybe I'll do that. And I shifted gears more towards that, and that's what led me into getting into other things and getting into music and stuff too, because I felt like comics was gonna it wasn't really going to be around for much longer. I was like, if Marvel goes under, DC's pretty much next. They're
Right.
already doing so many weird things to their characters, and Image was kind of sort of imploding upon itself too. It just felt so strange. But it wasn't until like early 2000s, maybe 2003, when I thought comics seem to be course correcting, and I'm falling in love with them again, and I'm falling in love with the aspect too all over again of making my own stuff. So that's
That's
funny
cool.
that you say that with that happening, because there was kind of a lot of things converging, and then as my love of comics and my inclination to being a comic creator was kind of going, it was going in the same direction for you as well, and I think probably for a lot of other creators who were going through the same thing at the same time, and then everyone was starting to sort of, I guess, start to see the light again around 2003 to 2005.
Yeah, I think it started picking up too. I mean, there were some really interesting things. I think the industry also figured out. If I remember right, there was some really good comics coming out around that time, like Marvel and things like that. Because if I remember right, what was happening is like there was that experiment. It's like, oh well, artists over writers, and so then there became like this little power struggle after where writers were really trying to insert, like, oh well, where the lead guys, pencilers or or the visual guys are lesser, and so there was the power struggle. But I do remember there was a sweet spot, like a moment in time, where the writers and the art like were really meshing. So maybe that was around 2003. It was when I was working with Carlos Pacheco
Yeah.
on the X-Men, when I felt like, and then the early Ultimate books and stuff like that. It felt like things were like story and art were meshing. You know what I mean? There was good equal, good stories, good artwork, kind of a good blend. And then I think the writers really started, inserting, their power after that, because I think they saw that people were responding to what was happening. And it was partially because of them. They were writing good stories. And then they got all egoed out like Bendis and some of those guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, that's why I stopped publishing like independently. The sales just weren't there on Black and White #1 of the ongoing. So I had two other issues, but just running scared. Like that's probably like the Image, like jumping from Marvel to Image, and like some of those other things. They didn't seem scary, but when you have a kid and a mortgage and things are different. And so I was just like, well, I'm going to go back to Marvel. It's a steady paycheck, and I'll start up Hack Shack Studios again, and we'll just put out a lot of cool books, and I was fully prepared to just kind of like end my career, at Marvel. I just kind of like chain my desk to the Marvel way. And that's the first time I ever felt like that. Like I just wanted stability. I wanted to raise this little person, so I just wanted that kind of stability and security. And so then, like 10 years into it or whatever it was, I found out that it was just a false, there is no security. They
Yeah.
fired me and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing is, I was gonna mention something, but I'm not gonna mention it.
Oh, come on, Pete.
No, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna mention it. That would derail this amazing conversation. I want to focus it on you still. Now we got a couple questions here in the chat that are really good ones. I want to get to them. We're at an hour 15. Can you do another 15 minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
And just to kind of answer your question real quick, when the CG thing happened, and this movement that we're currently involved with, I watched it from the early stages, and then I've always, since that Image time in '94, I waited my whole career for this opportunity again, right? I did publish like Chrono Mechanics with Image and it was a break-even proposition, but there was no money in it. So I could never like go, I'm going to create independently, and make a living. But then CG and this current state of crowdfunding, things like that. And I started crowdfunding like 10 years ago when they were calling it e-begging and stuff like that.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, me too.
yeah,
All of us were like, for $1 a day, you can support us, and
yeah,
no one knew
exactly.
the hell what to do. It was just very strange.
Yeah, and then your professional peers are like, you e-beggar, like Art's, down on his luck or whatever. And
Yeah,
so then, like it was viable then, but then it just kept growing, like every month, every 6 months, every year, it just became stronger and stronger and more of a following, beginning and building up. So this is the best time I've ever been doing comic books. But anyway, I just wanted to
yeah.
kind of give you that full answer there.
Before I get into the questions, you self-distribute and sell everything yourself, right? You don't have distribution connections, do you?
Right. Yeah. My wife and I do the fulfillment.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like everything happens at the right time because we have so many avenues of sale now as independent creators. Crowdfunding, you can have your own site. You can use, hell, you could use eBay or Amazon or whatever if you wanted to. You could even maybe talk to some retailers and maybe they might even take some books on. But you don't necessarily need to go that tried and true traditional path, even towards distribution, let alone publishing. So it's
Right.
interesting where everything really, it's another convergence of a whole bunch of things. So here's some great questions, and so far they're all coming from Comics for Life. If anybody else has questions in the chat, let me know. I'll star them and I'll try to get to them as much as I can. The first one here is how do you feel this new age compares to when you started, pro and con wise?
Well, I do feel like this has come full circle. So, like I said, like Renegade Press, with the underground guys smoking a lot of dope and hanging out, partying and drawing comics. I feel like it took me 40 years to get to this place, but it's finally it's stable. It feels stable, anyways. What we're doing, and it pays well. So I think for me personally, it's where I've always wanted to be. I was never one of those guys that, it wasn't like I was against it, but like, oh, I want to draw Spider-Man, or, I was never really like that. I mean, there was that part of me that, it's like, oh, this is really cool. But it wasn't like that was the big dream. I do believe the big dream was ultimately telling my own stories. So I do think that was it. So, like I said, it only took me 40 years to get here. So, pros and cons. The pros are just being independent. I know. I think Pete and I might have talked about this early on. Like when the COVID lockdowns and distribution was drying up and retailers were closing up and stuff like that. We were still, thanks to you guys, we were still moving and grooving. You know what I mean? Like it didn't really affect us. If anything, I think we benefited from it. And so I was like, this is amazing. Like we are truly independent. So even if there's a catastrophe like a world lockdown, we can still move and sell our comic books. It was a little more challenging to get, printers and things like that, but
Yeah, yeah. But other than
but we could
that,
do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You know,
And so cons,
absolutely.
I don't know. It's a lot more work, but the thing is, I've never cared about working hard. As long as you can see results, you know what I mean. Like you hate like
Yeah.
just busting your ass and not seeing anything in return. But this is not the case. So and as long as you love what you're doing, like hanging out in these live chats, hanging out with you guys, and interacting with people that are supporting us and buying these books. Um, I don't really see any like any
Yeah.
downside, at least at this moment in time.
The thing is, most people are going to be working their butts off anyway. You might as well, if you can, work your butt off for yourself.
Right. Yeah.
That's the best of it.
And nobody
Comics
can
for
take it
life.
away from you. Like nobody can take it away. Like
Very true.
alternative comics exist as long as you want to work your ass off.
Exactly. Yeah. Comics for life. Another great question says, as an inker, whose pencils impressed you the most?
Wow, these are always tough questions. You know what? I I think Dave Finch. I like Dave Finch's. Just it was like the pencils aren't, they're tight, but they're not tight. I mean, there's really like this organic, kinetic energy that he brings to stuff, and when I was inking him, I was like, I'm gonna match that. So it was just fun to try to match it. Some guys will, excuse me, they'll try to tighten it up. Like, oh, I got to tighten up this stuff. I was the opposite. I was like, I'm going to keep this kinetic energy. So if it looks sketchy, it looks like he's moving his hand like this, I'm going to kind of move my pen like that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to kind of.
Frazetta would be proud.
Yes. But yeah, that's pretty much, I'd say Dave Finch.
Very nice. Yeah, that's a good one. He's tough to beat with that. Comics for Life says, is there a time when something that didn't fall through really disappointed you?
Oh yeah. Actually, I'm going to get into this on the professionals. So I think next week or this coming week is Andy Smith, and then after that is me. So 2 weeks, and we'll get into this deeper. So if you guys haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, it's just RT Bear. Subscribe, and then just look forward to professionals. It's on Tuesday night at is it 8 Eastern time?
I think
And
that's where you guys go. Yeah.
yeah, so we'll probably get into it more detail, but yeah, there's definitely been jobs that have disappointed me. And just one right off the bat, I was supposed to work with Keith Giffen, R.I.P., on an Aquaman series, and he was going to do the layout. So he was like the layout guy. So this is when he was doing JLA and all that stuff,
Man.
Lobo and all that. So he was riding high. So I was like, yes. I get to pencil, off Keith Giffen layouts. It's going to be a blast.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Man, oh man. Another one here from Comics for Life says, do you think the lack of experience in youth was what hurt Image early on?
I think ego is what hurt Image early on. I think those guys, they just kind of fed on each other. I think there was, at the beginning, there was an alliance. So it's like early days, when you're starting something and you're unsure, you kind of bond closer to other people because you really need them, right? So, there's safety in numbers, strength in numbers. So I think there was this camaraderie early on. But as soon as they could show that they could be independent and survive, I think that's when the problem started. As soon as they were like, I don't need you anymore. And I do feel there was a lot of that going on. So, and maybe some youth, just as far as not getting product out, maybe, or keeping.
Well, yeah, I mean, just even the idea of their youth and inexperience and lack of perspective and that kind of thing. Usually that comes, age with wisdom and yada yada.
Yeah.
So, maybe that led to it. Especially, man, they were making 10 times the amount on their own, with one book than they would. It's like.
Yeah, the Image cut. I think they were making at least $1. They were making over $1 per cover. So you sell 1 million
They were
books.
printing their own money.
Yeah, and then you put out 2 or 3 books that month. Like that. I mean, Rob was smart. It didn't really matter. I'm sorry, Rob. The quality. It was if you could put 3 books out and all do close to 1 million sales, 500,000 to 700,000 to 1 million, in sales, and do 3 books a month, 4 books a month. That's you do whatever you can to get that going, and no one had experience to how to do this. There was no one went to school for this. No one really worked in a publishing house or anything like that, or ran a studio or any of those type things. So everybody's learning things as they're going. And just kind of like CG right now, and what Pete's got a little bit more experience now, but, early on, you're trying to figure out, how do I connect with distributors, retailers, how do I get the word out?
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff.
I'm still learning now about different ways to do different things and ways to work smarter, not harder, or maybe
Yeah.
both at the same time, which will really amp up your production. But yeah, there's all kinds of things to learn, and people that are just sitting back and they go, "Ah, no, I'm all set. I don't need to learn anymore." I'm like, "All right, well, you might as well just stop. You might as well just stop and go do something else
Yeah.
because you're
It's the
obviously not
challenge,
really
right? It's the challenge. It's
Yeah.
like somebody says, "Well, you can't do that." And it's like, "Oh, really?"
Yeah,
I'll
it's just a
show you.
motivator, right? It's
Yeah,
like, oh, I can't do that.
I remember I talked to this guy. He was another artist. He worked in the studio with me, and we had the same conversation. And he's like, "I'm only motivated by positive." And I go, "You're only motivated by positive?" I go, "Well, how does that motivate you?" And he goes, "Just like the purity of just like competing against myself and all the this kind of stuff." And I go, if you look at every really successful person's backstory, they were effed over by somebody, right? Like, Walt Disney lost his creation. Like there's some kind of like, like tragedy that happened. And then there's just like, "Oh yeah, I'll show you." And I think that's what pushes you beyond the norm. You know what I mean? Those are the
Yeah,
things that
like any good character in a comic. Something has to happen. Some kind of trauma has to happen
Yeah.
to set you on the path that you're on. Are you now on the path of the hero or the villain? Which one?
Gamma radiation. That was my thing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have something.
You gotta have something.
Frederick's got a great question. Says, how much planning do you put into your writing?
Too much. My wife and I are doing some tweaks right now on black and white, the dialogue and things, and she's just like, "You always like are overthinking all this stuff," and then like I'll just like, okay, and then I start moving forward because that's kind of like what she's trying to get me to do, but then you go a day or two and your brain never lets it go. And then you come back to the drawing board, and then if you have a writing partner, you hit them with like, "Oh, here it is," and they're like, "Oh shit, there was a problem." You know what I mean? Like once there's a solution, and then you see, like when you're writing, you see that solution, and then how it frees up all these other things, like how all these other things line up once you took care of that one thing. And so that's kind of like you plan it out. And then for me, I sit on it, like I put it aside, and then I work on something else, and then I come back on it with fresh eyes. And fresh eyes isn't exactly like how it's a saying, but for me, it's like that your subconscious is figuring those things out. So then when you
100%.
come back to it, you actually don't even know you have the solution, but you have the solution. So it almost feels like magic.
Yeah, because it's working on it. It's working on it,
And that's why we're loco in the cavese.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes doing some monotonous task, cleaning, doing whatever, and you're still thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then it eventually clicks, and you're just like, that's how I'll do it, but you weren't really focusing tremendously on that. That happens a lot. But you have to allow yourself that time. And sometimes when people are really cramming and they're crunching on trying to figure that out, and you're just thinking about it over and over again, you're just, what you're doing, I think, is you're constantly trying to figure out how to make that bad writing, that bad situation, whatever it may be, how to figure out how does that work now. But the thing is that it doesn't work. That's why. So you have to take a step away from it, because the thing you're really focusing on making it work just doesn't. So when you get away from it and you allow yourself to kind of just breathe a bit, and then you can come back to it, you see it with, what feels like fresh eyes, but it's really
Right.
because you have been figuring it out
All
and realize-
along. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like the planning thing is, for me, and I'm sure everybody else, is you plan the beginning, middle, and end. But I know myself enough now that I know that things are going to change along the way. But the things, as far as the planning and putting it in stone, the beginning, middle, and end always have to be, for me, have to be in stone. You know what I mean? So it's how you get there, that's kind of the thing. Or like what motivates a character. Those are the things that kind of reveal themselves as you're working on it. But I'd say as far as the planning, definitely have a beginning, middle, and end, to work towards.
Absolutely. Thank you, some person, for putting that link right there in the chat for Black and White Volume 2, Man vs. Machine by the Art T. Bear. That's on Indiegogo right now in demand. And Spicer McLeroy, thank you so much for gifting 10 memberships to people in the chat. Appreciate that, Spicer. Thank you very much. And everybody that's now a member, enjoy your time. We also have this isn't a question, but it's a comment from AL. It says, I don't have any questions. I just want to tell Art how much his art makes me happy.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I mean, really, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was talking to Pamela. Like, we would be nowhere without you. Like, these books wouldn't exist. Like, none of this stuff would happen without somebody that, is supporting this and hopefully enjoying it along the way. So thank you, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Rain7 says, thank you for your insights and sharing your experiences, Art.
No problem.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then this will be the last question for the night. Comics Odyssey says, I believe the best way to help yourself is to help others succeed. So what do people in comics now need help with? What do you think people need help with in comics right now?
Well, I just to back up a little bit, Comics Odyssey, I believe the same thing. So when I ran Hack Shack Studios, a lot of those guys that came through the doors there, they had no skills coming in. They had ambition, they had some drive, they were willing to work, and they listened. And they became talent. So people that came out of Hack Shack Studios, like we already talked, like Danny Mickey, Trevor Scott, Jaime Mendoza, Larry Stucker, John Sabal. There's just so many. Tim Townsend got his start, on Spawn doing my backgrounds. There's just been a lot. So I do believe in giving back. I always have, and I always will. So what do people in comics now need help with? Wow, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, you notice anything, even if it's just one thing, but not the thing? You notice anything that people seem like they would need the most help with? Is it the writing, the art, the graphic design, the promotion? What might it be?
I'm almost thinking deeper. I'm almost thinking like understand what a hero's journey is. Like, what is a hero? Like, I don't think like there's people that even know those fundamentals right now.
So understanding like philosophy, psychology, people in general,
what it is, what is a hero?
Yeah.
What is that? You have people like what is his name? Zack Snyder. I read an article with him, and he said he doesn't believe in altruism. He says it doesn't exist. He said everybody does something for a motive. And it's like, there are people that will sacrifice themselves for somebody else, even a stranger. It does exist. Like, you can't deny it, but he denies it. And then this is the guy that's writing
That explains
Superman.
a lot about the Superman movies.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And everything that he's done, like, that's a pretty dark point of view.
That's
if
a very
you're writing heroes.
Lex Luthorian thing to say.
Yeah. He probably writes great villains.
He should have wrote a Luthor movie. That would have been interesting.
It would have been right up his alley, yeah. But I think that's really lacking. I just don't think that they understand the hero's journey and what it's like to even be a hero.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's a great comment. And Arthur Brown, the Uncanny Kodiak, thank you so much for the $1.99 super chat. Says, hail Alterna, best name in comics ever, and hail T-Bear. There you go.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to end it here. Thank you guys tonight. I know you guys had a couple other questions, but we have to end it here. Otherwise, we're going to be going to 2 hours, and we just can't do that. We both got a lot of stuff to do, and Art was already very generous with his time, going an extra half hour or so. Other than that, thank you guys so much. It is Veterans Day, so if you are a veteran out there, thank you for your service. Thank you for everything this day and every day. Much appreciated to you guys. Before we go, Art, where can they find you?
All social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. So if you guys aren't subscribed to my YouTube channel, just type in my name, you'll find it, and subscribe. Hit that that notification, so when I go live, you guys can see it. I have a show that I do every Wednesday. It's called Pontificators, and that's at 8 Eastern, I do believe, as well. And then there's the professionals that I do. It's a rotating show I do with Graham Nolan, Aaron Lepresti, Andy Smith, Dan Fraga, and Billy Tucci. And so next week is going to be on Andy Smith's channel. Then after that will be it'll be on my channel. So check that out. And then of course Mondays on the Kings, and that's on Ethan Van Sciver's channel. So those are the places you can count on me being. Otherwise, I might just pop up on, Peter's, one of his live streams. You never know.
You never know. Thank you guys again so much for being here tonight. Everybody go check out Art T. Bear's Black and White Volume 2. It's in demand right now on Indiegogo. Go subscribe to Art. The links for both are in the description of the show. Also, if you enjoyed the show, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, all that good stuff. Lots of interviews coming up on this channel. We've already done, as you can see, quite a few, 112. This is the episode today, and we've got more. Tomorrow night, I'll be back at 9 o'clock Eastern with Frankie Paul, the comic who loves comics. He's always posting some really fun comic images on Twitter, and that dude loves comics, man. It's going to be a fun conversation tomorrow night, again, 9 o'clock Eastern. And go check out Alterna Comics. We've got the winter apparel and merch campaign right now on the website. Nowhere else. It's just on the Alterna site, alternacomics.com/winter will take you there. It is not on Indiegogo. It is not on Kickstarter. It is not on Fund My Comic. It is nowhere else other than the Alterna site. And that ends on November 27th. You can get blankets, hoodies, beanies, mugs, all that good stuff. And of course, King Cryptid. Check it out. Number 5 to 9 currently funding on both Indiegogo and the Alterna site as well. And that is my baby that I'll be working on, hopefully, for the rest of my days. I've got a lot of stories to tell, so I've got a lot to do there.
So get everybody, on it, Peter.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody, thank you so much. Art, thank you so much. Very generous with your time tonight. Really appreciate it. That was a great conversation and really insightful too, man. Everyone, see you tomorrow night. And until then, have a great night and an even better tomorrow. See you guys.